Often when activists and government officials talk about addressing poverty, we hear them speaking in terms of basic needs. And usually when someone refers to the basic needs, they're talking about the big three: food, shelter, and clothing. There's definitely a conversation to be had about expanding the list beyond those three, how, especially in our modern world, things like healthcare, education, transportation, and connectivity also ought to be regarded as basic needs to which every person is entitled. But that's not the conversation I want to have right now. Right now, I want you to think about those classic three basic needs and consider that one of them is not like the others in a pretty important way. Because as vital as clothing and shelter are, you can survive for a good long while without them under certain conditions. In terms of survival, clothing and shelter are important because they offer you protection from your environment and from the weather. But if the weather is nice and the environment in which you find yourself is reasonably free from danger, you could probably do okay for yourself, naked and without permanent shelter. Not saying I'd like to try it, or that anyone else should ever be in a position where they would have to, but it would be survivable, provided you had enough food and water. Food and water are not our only basic needs, but they're probably the most basic and the most universally needed. Well, and air, but that's still free, and will remain so until some entrepreneur figures out a way to privatize it, sell it to you at an absurdly inflated cost, and convince you it's actually better that way, because when you pay for it, you appreciate it more, and you know you're getting the highest quality product for your breath-buying dollar. Food and water are not as free as air to most people, and that's a shame, because no matter who you are or where you live, you need them to survive. Unfortunately, despite how necessary they are, hundreds of millions of people around the world, including tens of millions right here in the United States, are forced to go without reliable sources of food and water. Unfortunately, there are some things we can do about that. Unfortunately, for those things to be effective, we will have to actually, do them. Unfortunately, I feel like Homer Simpson talking to the guy who sold him the monkey's paw. Anyway, if you've seen my video on homelessness, a lot of this might sound familiar because from where I stand, just as the solution to homelessness is to give people homes, the best way to deal with hunger is to give people food. And in fairness, there seems to be reasonably broad agreement about that. It's kind of obvious hungry people need to eat. Things start getting complicated when we consider how to get the food to the hungry people and who qualifies as hungry or hungry enough to receive assistance. Here in the United States, the primary program operated by the federal government to address hunger and food insecurity is called SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, sometimes still referred to informally as food stamps after the paper stamps which beneficiaries used to receive, which could then be exchanged for food. Today, people receive their SNAP benefits in the form of a preloaded payment card known as an EBT, or Electronic Benefit Transfer. But even though SNAP recipients get their benefits electronically, the current system retains many limitations from the days of paper food stamps. The first federal food stamp program was created in 1939 and was designed to redistribute agricultural surpluses to hungry people. The program ran for 4 years, as long as the surpluses lasted, and was a success. Millions of Americans benefited. But because only certain foods were part of the surplus, the less expensive food stamps were only redeemable for foods which the Department of Agriculture had designated surplus. Given the original intent of the program, that limitation made sense, but the condition that recipients could only use their nutrition benefits to buy certain foods would remain a part of the programs that followed. Now, to be fair, SNAP benefits can be used to purchase most kinds of food at grocery stores, but they can't be used to buy hot food or food that is meant to be consumed at the place where it's purchased. Some SNAP recipients can use their benefits to buy food at restaurants if the restaurant accepts EBT cards as a form of payment and if the recipient falls into a particular category, such as being elderly or disabled. SNAP is also means tested, so in order to qualify, would-be recipients need to satisfy a series of eligibility requirements. As a result, many people who experience food insecurity, who need the benefits the program offers, are excluded because they, for example, have too much money in the bank, or don't work enough hours in a month, or don't spend a large enough percentage of their income to pay for housing. There are other problems with the program. Because fresher and more nutritious foods tend to be more expensive, SNAP recipients can often find it difficult to maintain a healthy diet for themselves and their families. Some states have chosen to administer their SNAP benefits in ways that try to address this problem, but in 2013, a study published by the research arm of the USDA found that SNAP participants tend to eat less healthy than even other low-income people who aren't receiving SNAP benefits. Increasing the amount of money SNAP beneficiaries receive would help, but it wouldn't entirely solve the problem. That's because many people struggle to eat better, not because they can't afford healthy foods, but because healthy foods simply aren't available in their area. Millions of Americans live in food deserts, meaning if they live in an urban area, they're more than 1 mile away from a supermarket, or if they live in a rural area, more than 10 miles away from a supermarket. People in food deserts don't have regular access to fresh fruits, vegetables, or meats, and so their diets often consist of much larger amounts of processed, packaged foods, which contain more sugar, fat, and salt than fresh foods and are also less nutritious. As a result, food deserts tend to have higher rates of both obesity and child malnutrition. Hunger and food insecurity are problems that affect tens of millions of people in this country. Minority communities and people with disabilities tend to suffer more as a result of these problems than those who fall outside those categories, but we should all want to fix this. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. We Americans love to brag about how wealthy and powerful we are as a nation, but no nation with the resources and the infrastructure of the United States should accept a status quo where millions of people go hungry or exist in a constant state of uncertainty as to where their next meal is going to come from. That is an obscenity. Our federal, state, and local governments, as well as countless private organizations, have spent generations trying to address hunger and food insecurity, but we still need to do more. Fortunately, there's a lot more we can do. The first thing I think we need to do is resort our priorities regarding this issue. As with homelessness, I think many governmental efforts to address hunger are worried about the wrong things. We give hungry people assistance to buy food, but first they need to jump through the right hoops. Why not get rid of the hoops? We should treat hunger and food insecurity the same way Housing First programs treat homelessness. If people need food, give them food or give them money to buy food. Worry about whether or not they've got a job or how much of their budget they spend on housing costs or how much money they've got in the bank later. People are hungry. Feed them. How do we do that? We can start by reforming and expanding the SNAP program. We should streamline the participation requirements so that more people who need it are eligible to participate, increase the dollar amount people receive in their benefits, and send out benefits twice a month rather than once. We should also do more to turn food deserts into food oases by expanding and increasing funding to programs like the federal government's Healthy Food Financing Initiative, which awards grants to establish and maintain grocery stores and farmers markets in food deserts. In addition to all of that, I think child hunger in this country could be greatly reduced if we made breakfast and lunch at public schools free for all students. Though, truthfully, I'd advocate for that even if child hunger wasn't an issue. I believe in public education, and I believe kids should be required to attend school, except during a pandemic. But it's a little messed up to force them to go and then make them bring or buy their own lunch, don't you think? Those are all things I think it's worth contacting your representatives in Congress and your state legislatures about. But there's something else we can do too. I've said before that I'm not an anarchist, but some of the ideas embraced by anarchists are pretty good. Probably the best of those is mutual aid. And the mutual aid response to hungry people is pretty straightforward. Give them food. My friend Danielle Muscato works with an organization in Louisville, Kentucky called Feed Louisville that, since the start of the pandemic, has partnered with local restaurants, farmers, and churches to prepare and deliver meals directly to homeless people in the Louisville area. Thanks to the hard work of its volunteers and the support of its community, Feed Louisville has been able to deliver nearly 3,000 meals a week for the last year. I would love to see a group like Feed Louisville operating in every city and town in the United States. I'd also love for those groups to have the resources necessary to feed every single person who needs their help. And because I'm not an anarchist, I think the federal government has a role to play in helping to make that happen. Not by coming in and telling these local mutual aid groups what to do and how to do it, but by giving them money. It's kind of amazing how much better so many of our country's problems would be if the government just gave people money, isn't it? Like most of the other issues I've talked about in this series, hunger and food insecurity are complex problems tied into some of the most enduring and harmful inequalities in our society. Communities of color tend to experience food insecurity more than white people, so if we want anti-hunger measures to be as effective as they should be, we need to address institutionalized racism in a far more serious way than we currently are. Food insecurity is a result of poverty, so alleviating poverty through things like mandating that the minimum wage be a living wage, or better yet, by implementing a basic income for everyone so that everyone could afford things like food and housing, would also reduce food insecurity. Hunger, like homelessness, like poverty in general, is a problem we can reduce, if not solve entirely. We have enough food and enough money in this country for everyone to have their basic needs met and then some. We just need to get it to the people who need it. For as long as I've been alive, conservatives have tried to scare their voters by saying liberals and leftists want to redistribute wealth. And in this instance, they're actually telling the truth, albeit with an inappropriately dire tone. I do want to redistribute money and resources from people who have more than they will ever need to people who don't have enough to meet their basic needs. That's something we should all be in favor of, no matter how rich or poor we are. It's moral, it's just, and if we want our concern for the less fortunate to be anything more than nice-sounding rhetoric, it's a necessity.